Hello, welcome again to Sport Unlocked with Tariq, Panja from the New York Times, Martyn, Ziegler from the Times, and myself, Rob Harris from Sky News. And if you're not up to date on our pods, there's one in the last week on the IOC transgender ban and another two.
Yeah, we've done another one on issues including the threat of Qatar sponsorship of this new Rugby Union Nations Championship.
And many thousands of you are watching the clips on YouTube and TikTok, so you can subscribe to us at Sport Unlocked there. A lot to get into this week. Delving into the Premier League finances of Chelsea and Newcastle. Their accounts are out, and I'll wash up from World Cup qualifying. But first, a story you might have missed. Quite a significant one from Australia from 2027. They're going to be introducing a lot more stringent bans on betting advertising.
Yeah, this looks like the way things are going. They're going to ban celebrities or athletes doing betting advertising targeting sports fans and on kit, sports kit. So we're already seeing in the Premier League there's a sort of voluntary move. From next season, there will be no gambling adverts on the front of players' shirts, but Australia going several steps further.
And including a restriction of 3 ads per hour between 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m. to promote betting products, and a complete ban whenever live sport is on within those hours.
Wasn't there going to be something like that in the UK a few years ago?
The whistle-to-whistle ban, so you can't have any betting ads while matches are on.
You can do it before the match starts.
But someone who's going big on betting now, particularly for this World Cup, is FIFA, streaming games on betting sites, promoting betting companies. For so long, betting companies have made a lot of money off World Cups. Now FIFA is getting a piece of the action. And now we do know this week the 48 teams who will make up this World Cup. Coming up in the United States, Canada, Mexico, we've had the final rounds of qualifying with the playoffs. What is most noticeable? Gianni Infantino, throughout his entire term as FIFA president, Italy have now failed to qualify for every World Cup in the men's game.
Yes, and obviously Infantino is Italian heritage, born and raised in Switzerland, but has a very much close affiliation with the Italian national team, and he won't be able to watch them again.
But I must say that Switzerland have qualified for every World Cup in Infantino's presidency.
And his other team hasn't qualified either. Of course, he's got a Lebanese nationality recently.
But great for Bosnia, Herzegovina. Amazing scenes in Sarajevo after they qualified.
We've had Iraq, great celebrations there as well.
First time since the 1986 World Cup that they'll be back after years of war, going to a World Cup in the country that launched shock and awe on them in 2003.
Yeah, quite. And we've got Congo. First time they've qualified since, I think, 1974 when they were known as Zaire. And as Martyn said, Bosnia are there instead of Italy. We have had 3 other European qualifiers, well, Turkey being another one of those.
The Czech Republic.
And
Sweden, who are very interesting to delve into just how they've made it through, having won none of their qualifiers and making it into the playoffs because they won the 3rd tier group in the Nations League. There is nothing like it in qualifying around the world, the ability to slip into a World Cup, having struggled so badly in qualifying. Sweden finished bottom of their qualifying group, a group that contained Slovenia, Switzerland and Kosovo. No wins at all. But in the Nations League, they won their C group. That featured Slovakia, Estonia and Azerbaijan. But if you win your Nations League group, you get into the World Cup playoffs.
Yeah, what you're saying essentially, it's a great sort of foresight to be really bad at football, to get into Group C in the Nations League and effectively only need to win these 2 playoff games to qualify. Whereas someone like Italy, they were placed in the group with Norway. I think they'd done well in that qualifying group, but just had a very good Norwegian team in that competition that ended up going to the World Cup at their expense.
So is this fair? In some ways, it encourages teams to get demoted into an easier Nations League route to provide that backdoor into tournaments.
If you ask Italy, they're going to say it's not fair, but it's that tension of UEFA trying to promote this Nations League, you need a carrot to make it interesting and make it worth something. And this is what they've come up with, giving more teams more chances of qualifying for the World Cup. It feels a little bit weird that all of these different routes into getting into the World Cup are available to teams. And like I said, Italy weren't terrible in their qualification program. They were down to 10 men in that game against Bosnia and lost on penalties, whereas Sweden, as you described, been pretty pitiful over the last season and a half, and made it thanks to that 3-2 victory they had in their home qualifier at the last. Now, that was another question here about fairness, about one-leg home ties. But then you've got this calendar crunch, haven't you?
Well, FIFA has addressed it with the intercontinental playoffs. You used to have a situation of two-legged games where you'd have to switch from one side of the world one week to the other side of the world a few days later for the second leg. But now they've put all the games in one place, in this case, in the last week in Mexico. So that has a fairness, doesn't it?
I don't think it's the most unfair system in the world. I mean, if you think Bosnia-Herzegovina, they had their first playoff away against Wales. Italy had their first playoff home against Northern Ireland. So yes, in the second, the playoff final, obviously they were away. But I think Turkey won. They were away from home and they won and they got through. So I think that's fine. And the thing about the Nations League, I think it is really important that there is something proper to play for and all these things. I think it adds to the excitement of that tournament. I think if you're just going to focus on it has to be this qualifying tournament, nothing else can come in. I mean, why not make the Nations League a bit more interesting?
You're right if you have this other competition, but I don't know, when it's called the European World Cup qualifying, it is the only reason it exists for this period. So maybe this is the issue about the calendar. Maybe get rid of this whole thing and just have a Nations League competition that gets you to the World Cup. It's this issue about cramming fixtures in, isn't it?
It's something Africa is going to have to address, because in the last week they've decided to increase the Africa Cup of Nations from 24 to 28 teams. So 28 of the 54 African nations will qualify for their continental competition. So that does reduce the jeopardy in qualifying. Something that has been discussed overall with Italy missing out is, for instance, with Sweden getting in through the back door, some even suggesting, well, World Cup former champions as Italy are 4 times should be guaranteed a slot every time. And we're getting into Super League territory here, because it's a bit like in the Champions League saying, well, Karabakh shouldn't be in the Champions League, we should just have more of the best English teams and quality players. That's the point of those competitions and the World Cup. It's not guaranteed to be the very best teams that make it. They've got to go through a process.
FIFA used to have the situation where the winning team would qualify automatically for the next World Cup, but then they scrapped that, didn't they? Because it made the qualifying tournament for that country so sort of obviously there wasn't one, so they had all this years, 4 years till the next one. They didn't play any sort of serious competitive matches. Obviously, other tournaments have come in since then, since they took that decision, but I still think it's good for that. All the teams have to come through the qualifying competition, whether they're the past winners or whatever.
And questions about why does Europe only have 16 slots when the World Cup's increased from 32 to 48 teams? They've only added 3 slots this time. Well, it's correcting a historic imbalance, because it has allowed Africa to go from 5 to 10 slots.
Yeah, Europe historically, as you said, had so many. 16. If you can't be in this top 16 in Europe, maybe you don't deserve to go to the World Cup. They have expanded it. And not that long ago, an entire European Championship, Euro 96, was just 16 teams, if I remember correctly. So it's part of the competition. These qualifiers are a journey, and that is to test yourself against the other best teams in your region and try and make it there. I think it's perfectly fine. 16 European teams is more than enough.
You're right. I mean, it was Euro 2008 was 16 teams. That was only then that they expanded it to 24. But to talk about Italy and this successive failures, somebody sent me an interesting thing. If you look at the under 17 FIFA World Cup results, they didn't qualify from 2011, 2013, 2015, 2017, 2019, 2023. It's only in 2025 that the under-17 qualified and actually finished third, and have been a much, much stronger force in the last couple of years. But that whole decade of the under-17s not qualifying for this biennial youth tournament just shows that there have been serious problems in the academy structure, Italian clubs. Young players just haven't been coming through. It looks like that is changing now, but what we're seeing, I think, is the senior team paying the price for the failures to have a proper youth setup. And I mean, it's the lack of investment in Italian football in its stadiums and its clubs is well known about. And I just think this is all reflective of what's happening.
Yes, and when some are looking for reasons for Italy's struggles, missing out on 3 consecutive World Cups, perhaps they're not going back far enough to some of those structural changes that weren't implemented after the 2010 World Cup when they went out in the group stage. Roberto Baggio was brought in effectively as a technical director to come up with a master plan to sort things out. We've seen it at the English FA over the years with Trevor Brooking and Gareth Southgate. Gareth Southgate, in the wake actually of England's 2010 World Cup debacle. Now, the problem for Baggio was he came up with this big plan and it was called Renewing the Future, 900 pages, but it was presented in 2011, but then he resigned in 2013 because his plans weren't being implemented.
Yeah, so a dysfunction at the governance level clearly there, but from the results Martyn gave earlier of these youth teams, perhaps if you're looking at it glass half full, maybe some of these issues that belatedly have been rectified. These youth performances have improved, and sometimes it takes a cycle. Remember England in 1994 not qualifying for the World Cup last time it was played in America, and it's going through all sorts of hand-wringing. The England team right now, having gone through a whole process, a whole renewal, has got one of the strongest national teams in world football. Whether they win the World Cup or not, who knows? But they are one of the contenders.
And they are the only European team this century to not have to rely on playoffs to make a World Cup.
Yeah, that tells you that whatever's happened in terms of restructuring English football to develop youth has been successful. And it reminds me, actually, I was at Milan for the Olympics, and talking to people there, and I remember that like one of the debates in Italy is like, we got too many foreign players. That's the problem. There's too many foreign players in Serie A. There's not enough space for young Italian players. Like, guys, I remember this being one of the bats to hit English football with. There's too many foreigners in England, in the Premier League and everything else. We're not saying that anymore. We're producing incredibly talented young English footballers while also having a lot of foreign players there. So having that balance and having a pathway for young players is clearly worked for English football.
And some complacency in Italy, having had one of the best leagues in the world in the 80s and 90s, watched far beyond its shores, went into decline, and it's not taking your position at the peak for granted. Premier League in that position at the moment, and it shows things can go in cycles. And yet overall, Italy not implementing things like changes to youth development and coaching, paying the price for over the years. And if you look at England, well, the last time Italy won a match at a World Cup, Men's Football World Cup, Tariq, both you and myself were there.
Yes, we
in
were.
Manaus.
We were in Brazil, in Manaus, the border of the Amazon rainforest, and England lost 2-1, I think, that night to Italy in Manaus. I was actually, Rob, at the last game Italy played as well in a World Cup, which was a defeat. And you guys will remember why it will always be remembered. This was a defeat to Uruguay in Natal in 2014. Why will that be remembered?
I'm going to take a bite at this.
Yeah, come on.
Yes, good old Luis Suarez. Chiellini, wasn't it? On the receiving end.
Yeah.
The finest of doorsteps of a FIFA meeting on the Copacabana.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic day. And also one of the finest documents I've ever read explaining how it was completely accidental, where Luis Suarez stumbled, fell, and landed teeth first into Chiellini's shoulder. I think that's what the text said at the time.
If only had previous, he might have got away with it. But
A slight footnote to this, which was before England-Uruguay, I was sort of searching for a question. It was not an attempted gotcha because it was a legitimate issue, but I asked the Uruguay manager, given all the issues Suarez had faced with racism and biting in the Premier League, whether it had a word with him about his conduct at this World Cup, about curbing it, and he said he hadn't, but within days, it turns out within days, temperament did become an issue.
Remarkable. That group, by the way, it was England that finished last, so Italy at least didn't get the wooden spoon in that group with England, Costa Rica, and Uruguay.
And England manager at the World Cup, Roy Hodgson, who's back in management at the age of 78 this week at Bristol City. But here's a question. We're also at Wembley for the Euros final in 2021, won by Italy. In this terrible run of not making it to World Cups, they've still lifted a trophy, something England's men haven't done since 1966. So surely one of the questions around is, for your country, would you take seeing them winning a trophy, a Euros, or not being at a World Cup for many, many years? Well, it will be 16 years in this case, at least for the men's team by 2030. Take the one moment of joy or years of missing out on the big party?
no, I don't think you'd take the moment of joy. I think you'd take the England choice, wouldn't you? Losing in the final and qualifying for all those World Cups.
I'd take that. Want to see England at the World Cup in
Yeah, I think
not see a trophy one.
You want to see your team at the World Cup, but whatever country you are. I mean, as we talked about those celebrations in Sarajevo, that's as good as it gets for many countries. They can't even dream about the trophy. They just want to be at the World Cup.
Yeah, generations of fans grow up liking football because maybe the first glimpse of big time football they'll get is a World Cup moment. A lot of our memories of childhood are going to be linked to that. So now you have kids in Baghdad who, as Rob said, 50 years or so since they were 40 years or so since they last there, get to see the World Cup. It's fantastic.
Many of them having to watch on television. It is that shared experience around the world. It's harder to get to a World Cup. This week, more tickets have gone on sale. It's the first come, first served sales rather than entering into the draw. It meant a lot of people sitting there trying to get onto the FIFA website on April the 1st. They were struggling to log on, sitting in a queue for a long time. Those who got on finding, I think, tickets to the final over $10,000 now there. I suppose FIFA will say if the demand is there, they can make the money and invest it back into football. But to others, it looks like excess.
Yeah, you can still get tickets on the sort of the non-official resale platform on the secondary ticket sites. If you don't live in the UK, I should hasten to add, for the bargain price of £4,500. So yeah, get buying. But obviously, you need to have a dress outside the UK for them to be sent to.
So why is that for people who aren't familiar with the UK, Martyn?
It's because of there's legislation banning the secondary ticket sales of sports events in the UK.
While we're focusing on the upcoming World Cup, concerns about the 2030 World Cup are ever persistent, and the potential for racism in Spain, because we've seen it in the Spanish league so often, Vinicius Junior facing abuse, and then this week in a friendly between Spain and Egypt, anti-Muslim chants at various times during the game from the Spain fans. I don't know if they just didn't realise or just ignorant the fact that the biggest star in their team is Muslim. The fact is that Lamine Yamal, at just 18 years old, great hope, and he's having to play this match listening to these awful Islamophobic chants.
Yeah, so this was thousands of people involved in this chanting, so much so that a stadium announcement had to be made about them during the game, and a display on the big screen as well saying, please, effectively, don't be racist. But, I think it's brought a part of society, really, not just in Spain, in Europe. I think we're in a moment where it's quite easy to say offensive things about Muslims, whether it's politicians or broader society. And here we are, we'll sit in a football match with thousands of people chanting. What was it? I think I know in English the translation was "He who doesn't jump is a Muslim" or something like that.
Yes, and there's concerns about whether or not FIFA did implement their anti-racism protocol soon enough. The referee, FIFA have said absolutely nothing at the time of recording. There was a message at some point on the big screen, but when you've got it happening repeatedly, that's when you take the players off at some point.
Was it sort of reported to the referee? Is I suppose a key issue here.
Surely the match delegate should be hearing it.
It should be. He should do, shouldn't he?
Well, enough for it to be on a big screen and a message to go out during the game. So
Well,
someone's
yeah.
obviously heard it in order to have it organised. But Lamine Yamal has spoken about this now as well, as have other officials, haven't they?
Yes, it was a very strong statement in which he makes very clear he is a Muslim. Talked about Allah in the statement, and in it he talked about believing it wasn't aimed at him but Egypt, yet at the same time felt it was disrespectful and intolerable, and using a religion as a taunt on the field makes you ignorant and racist. And if you look at some of the reaction, there was quick condemnation from the Spanish government. They are a left-wing government, talking about how appalled they were, blaming the right for fueling the racist atmosphere with the rhetoric. And then we heard from the right-wing Vox Party, and their statement was talking about football stadiums being used for Ramadan prayers in recent weeks, and talking about foreigners in Spain.
Yeah, I just think that is a general part of the discussion point for political parties all across Europe. We've had similar debates, maybe not about football, but about other public spaces in the UK, for example. So, yeah, it just is it's a bit of a hostile environment for Muslim people, and here you have this situation in Spain.
Thought what did seem different this time was the media response. AS put it on their front page the morning after the game with "Worldwide Shame" as the headline, and the big image was of the anti-racism warning on the big screen. Maybe some other media a bit slower to react. Certainly some of the main news agencies didn't have photos of the messaging on the screen, so maybe it's a sign of the photographers working in the stadium even needs to be more alert to, one, did they hear the messages? Secondly, did they treat it as newsworthy, significant to react and take pictures? But then by Thursday morning, we did see more publications like Marca putting it on the front page with strong messages reflecting the statement from Yamal.
What's interesting is this is obviously in the year of the World Cup, less than 70 days before. What would happen if this kind of chant happened at the World Cup in the United States with all the politics around there? I think we've asked FIFA about other racist incidents like the Club World Cup and the messaging around racism at the Club World Cup, and they've been quite coy about that. But it does make you think, I wonder what it's going to be like if something like this happened at the World Cup.
Gianni Infantino was very quick, hours after the Champions League match recently, to condemn what happened with Prestiani allegedly racially abusing Vinicius Jr. when Real Madrid were at Benfica, demanding actions from authorities. That was setting the benchmark we expect then in future cases for quick comment. And we did from the Spanish team, from the players, from the managers, Luis de la Fuente. We heard them speaking out straight away in the press conference. De la Fuente talking about how he was, repulsed by this, willing to call out their own fans, which we wouldn't necessarily have seen in the past in Spain, I don't think.
Certainly not, we wouldn't have done. I remember about 11 years ago, the head of the Spanish FA at the time, Angel Maria Villalona, came to give a talk at a conference in London. I asked him about racism in Spanish football, and he just smiled and said that there is no racism in Spanish football. So there we go.
The now disgraced Angel Villalona, we should
Correct.
say.
Highly disgraced.
One bit of international news to mark. The Confederation of African Football held another news conference. Patrice Motsepe had an announcement to make. The head of the administration is out in the wake of the AFCON final debacle.
Yes, this is Veron Masenga Omba, who was former UEFA official, very close friend and colleague at the time of Gianni Infantino, went on to be FIFA. So it was after Infantino was elected FIFA president. Veron Masenga Omba moved to CAF, and it's been quite a bumpy ride there. You mentioned the issue with Morocco and Senegal. There's also the abrupt cancellations of the Women's African Cup of Nations, and also the fact that he might be over the age limit for the role as well. Anyway, so this guy has retired. Quite a divisive figure in many ways. Some people liked him, a lot of people didn't. And now another person familiar to both of you is acting or already been appointed. If I said the name Samson Adamu, would that mean anything to you two?
Amos Adamu was the FIFA executive committee member who was exposed by the Sunday Times, I think, for asking for bribes for World Cup votes in 2010, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. So Samson Adamu is Amos Adamu's son, also involved in the bidding process for the 18 and 2022 World Cups, because he was to have arranged a very important dinner for African delegates for the Qatar World Cup bid team to pitch to. Anyway, so he is now in charge, and he hasn't been accused of what his dad has been accused of. So let's hope he runs a good tight ship at CAF.
That's CAF finances. Let's move on to Premier League finances, because we're in the season where the club accounts start being published, so we get a glimpse into the state of clubs financially. And at Chelsea, a record financial loss from the owners who believe they've cracked football.
262 million more than the Manchester City's previous record in 2011, about 197 million. So yes, this is eye-watering stuff. I've had a few people saying, "Hang on a minute, if they lost so much money, how have they complied with the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules? Because you're only allowed to lose 105 million over 3 years. So how does that work?"
So how does it work?
Well, our favourite topic, or one of my favourite topics, is
what have they sold to themselves?
Yes, selling assets themselves. So not this year. The reason they've got such a big loss this year is they haven't sold anything to themselves significant. Whereas last year, they sold the women's team to themselves for £200 million. And the year before that, they sold 2 hotels to themselves for £72 million. So the Premier League allows that to be viewed as income and profit. So having made a profit in previous years, they just scrape by with this huge loss. But of course, not everybody accepts that, because UEFA don't. And that's why they got a £30 million fine last year.
And that fine is added to their losses, as will the Premier League one for next year, which makes you wonder if their fine had been any higher from the Premier League, maybe they would have some other issues to deal with. But they were also topped the agents' fees list, is that right? 3rd year running?
Yes. The English FA releasing how much clubs are spending on agents, of course, often needed to get deals done. Players benefit from it, but it is money that's seen as going out of the game. But this is how the table looks, with Chelsea right at the top with £65.1 million of spending on agent fees in the last year, 65% higher than number 2 in the list. That's Aston Villa with £38.5 million of agent spending.
It's a remarkable figure, and it's not the highest they've ever spent in a year. I think last year was a similar, about 60 odd million, and the year before was 75 million. So there's meant to be this sort of new approach, or this sort of, we're going to not pay players as much, but we're going to give them these crazily long contracts, and it's going to be heavily incentivized around success. But they still have how are they managing to rack up these huge agents' fees? It's basically, is it just the fact that they're signing more players than anybody else, or what?
Yeah, volume. I wonder if it's a function of that. Let's just another reminder that one of the reasons Chelsea were punished for past indiscretions was massive off the books payments to agents. So Chelsea's relationships with agents is quite long standing.
This ownership not accused of any wrongdoing.
No, not at all. But I was going to joke. None of these Premier League figures include undisclosed payments to agents.
If we look down the list, who perhaps is the wealthiest club in the Premier League? Maybe Newcastle a contender for that, given the ownership ultimately by Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. Well, only 20 million of agent spending. So that might reflect actually they're not doing as many deals that some might have expected when the takeover went through a few years ago. Things are a bit more restrained in terms of the finances there. We have had their results this week, but they've also sold something to themselves.
Yep, the leasehold on St James's Park has been sold to them to a newly formed subsidiary company. This is entirely to do with sort of put themselves in the correct position for sort of future stadium expansion or improvements, guys. It's nothing to do at all with PSR. If you listen to what their finance director was saying,
so they reported that a pre-tax profit of just under £35 million, but without that sale, it would have been a loss of just under £100 million. But for UEFA, they won't accept it, will they?
So they're likely to breach the UEFA rules, and what does that mean? Typically, in UEFA, will be some sort of financial penalty, a few million euros from UEFA, and it rolls on. But people will be listening to this, be thinking, it's so strange that the Premier League, as we keep telling everyone, is the richest league in the world, generating huge amounts of revenue. Yet these clubs have to engage in all of these kind of machinations to reduce massive losses. It's what a strange business, people will be wondering, the Premier League is.
Yeah, I also think it's strange around Newcastle because you had this takeover by Saudi Arabia, and obviously they had the seller sponsorship deal, but you're not seeing these huge. If they wanted to, Saudi companies could have any number of smaller sponsorship deals with Newcastle United. So they're a fair market value, but you're for any. You could have the official Chris partner in the Middle East or whatever could sponsor them, but you're not seeing that. I wonder why. Why has this sort of expected huge commercial dividend from being bought by Saudi Arabia not happened, do you think?
It looks like the interest from the outside isn't as great as it seemed in the beginning. They've concentrated on other things, internal projects like the Saudi Pro League there, and all sorts of other sports events within Saudi Arabia. There's also general belt tightening around a lot of projects related to Saudi Arabia. And, I'm thinking I wouldn't be surprised if the shirt sponsor, which is this entertainment company called Sela, S-E-L-A, on the front of Newcastle shirts won't be there once this current deal is done. They're going to have to go to market and find somebody else. I think Saudi money isn't as plentiful for Newcastle as it seemed. But then, if you have a whimsical king or crown prince as your top leader, maybe change his mind tomorrow.
As we record, they have signed a sponsorship. The training ground will now be known as the Knox, after Knox Hydration. Who's that owned by? Some UFC fighters.
Interesting.
I can't find immediate Saudi links. Searching around, having seen that announcement as we're recording, claims to be a South African brand fully there.
What a strange group of people to own your training ground. Did you say UFC fighters?
It is in keeping with the training ground, hydration drinks. Something we've seen in the Premier League this week about VAR. Now, the Football Supporters Association put out a survey, got a lot of headlines saying 3 in 4 fans are against VAR. So it seems pretty concrete. Now, the voice of fans is not heard enough. They don't have a seat on the FIFA Council, for instance. So this is not to dismiss the fans' views, but this is about data collection, because you see the headline, you might not know the reality. If we put a link to a website out from this pod saying, vote for us, what do you think of FIFA? Probably the people most likely to respond might be negative. Although actually maybe in FIFA they'll send it round to give a positive response. This was not a survey that was done with the type of polling companies where you get scientific polling, it's randomly selected, and you get a cross-section of society. This was a poll, because they don't have the financial resources to get anything more scientific, done through a web form, Survey Monkey, set out to members, anyone can enter. So it means the people most likely, perhaps potentially to enter, are those with the strongest opinion. So that's why you could get such a high response. So I was just sort of questioning some of the methodology this week and some of the partial release of information, particularly as then when I looked at the full data, over 50% did support VAR if it used it for red cards only.
Are you suggesting that somebody like Tariq has been going on and like filling out the survey about 100 times saying get rid of VAR?
I may or may not have voted 17,487 times to say get rid of VAR.
One question I thought was missing was saying to fans, if your team lost the final based on a decision that was wrong by the referee, would you have wanted VAR in that match to be used? And it could have overturned it, and it might shift the results a bit.
It may do. For us England fans about the hand of God 40 years ago this year, guys. But I think I think most fans, speaking anecdotally, not on any scientific evidence, think there are issues with VAR, but perhaps when it comes down to it, it's hard to get rid of it now. And just to say, an Ipso poll 2 years ago, I think it was split about 50-50 in favour or against VAR, and a YouGov poll before that said it was something like 70% were in favour of VAR, so long as it was changed. So there are lots of different survey results out there.
Sometimes the technology is the issue, the delays, referees dithering over decisions. Other times it's what VAR is used to implement. At the heart of it is the actual laws of the game. So VAR didn't create offside. It's existed since the 19th century in forms. So if you're grumbling about toenail offsides, them being assessed, well, that's because of the law of the game itself. But I was at England's friendly against Uruguay at Wembley over the internet.
Poor you, what a dreadful 2 hours you must have had.
Well, it went on even longer because of VAR delays. And I thought, well, isn't VAR meant for consequential games and decisions? Do you really need it in a friendly? I mean, it's a chance for referees and VARs to get experience built up, particularly in regions where they might not have as much use of it. But long delays, micro-analysing decisions in a friendly doesn't seem a good use of time. And I think that's why fans get irritated.
Not the Uruguay fans who were celebrating wildly when they were given that penalty at the last minute. But it does
that got them a 1-1 draw.
But it does just, for a lot of people, it just ruins the experience of football, doesn't it? But anyway, it's here to stay, it looks like. So we can just quietly complain to these various polling companies.
Or you can loudly complain by replying in the comments on our videos on TikTok and YouTube in particular, and on X, @Sport Unlocked, and Instagram as well. So we're there, engage with the videos, hit reply, and it builds up the audience for this as well.
Yeah, and if you favour a challenge system for VAR, such as the FA want to trial, then let us know.
As we do, you raise your hand when you want to make a point on the pod. If that's what's on the raw recording, you can challenge anyone's views on here. But as ever, thank you everyone for listening. Goodbye for now.